My son laid a hand on me inside my own kitchen, and I didn't say a word. But the next morning, when he came downstairs thinking I just accepted his disrespect, he froze in sheer terror when he saw who was sitting at my dining room table. I was sitting at the head of the table, smoothing out the lace tablecloth, the one my mother had crocheted by hand 40 years ago. It was a delicate thing, prone to staining, much like the piece in this house had been for the last 6 months. My hands were steady, which was a miracle considering the throbbing heat radiating from the left side of my face. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times. Each chime felt heavy, vibrating through the heart pine floorboards of my old Victorian home in Savannah. The air was thick this morning, heavy with the humidity that clings to the Spanish moss outside, but inside, the air was thick with something else entirely. It was thick with the smell of frying bacon, the rich, earthy scent of strong coffee, and the metallic, coppery taste of blood that I had been swallowing since midnight. When Brandon walked into the room, he carried that air of his, that swagger of unearned confidence, like he owned the world, or at least like he owned my world. He was wearing the same wrinkled t-shirt he had slept in, his hair a mess of oily spikes. He scratched his stomach, yawning loudly, a sound that grated against the silence I had carefully constructed. He hadn't even noticed the swelling on my lip. He hadn't looked at me long enough to see the bruise blooming like a dark orchid across my cheekbone. He was so focused on himself, so wrapped up in his own narrative of victimhood and entitlement, that I was just scenery to him. I was just the appliance that made the coffee. "About time you started cooking again," he grumbled, his voice rough with sleep and the lingering edges of a hangover. He didn't say good morning. He didn't ask if I was okay. He simply pulled out his chair, the chair that had belonged to his father, and slumped into it. He grabbed a biscuit from the basket in the center of the table. It was still warm, golden brown and flaky, the kind I had won blue ribbons for at the county fair back when life made sense. He took a bite, crumbs cascading down onto his shirt, and started talking about how things were going to change in this house. "Now that we're clear on things, Mom," he said, chewing with his mouth open, "I'm going to need the garage cleared out by Saturday. Chloe wants to set up her painting studio in there. And we need to talk about the internet speed. It's lagging when I'm gaming." He reached for the butter knife, completely oblivious to the fact that the atmosphere in the room was not one of submission, but of execution. "And another thing," he continued, waving the half-eaten biscuit in the air like a gavel. "Don't come into the living room when we have guests over. It kills the vibe. You stay in your room or out here in the kitchen. Understood?" I didn't answer. I just watched him. I watched the son I had nursed through fevers, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man I had bailed out of trouble more times than I could count. I looked for a trace of him in those bloodshot eyes, but there was nothing left. Just greed. Just a hollow, bottomless pit of need. "Did you hear me?" he snapped, finally looking up. That was when he saw it. Or rather, that was when he finally saw. He blinked, his eyes focusing on the purple and blue contusion distorting the left side of my face. For a split second, confusion flickered across his features. But it wasn't remorse. It was annoyance. He opened his mouth, likely to tell me to cover it up, to stop looking so dramatic. But the words died in his throat, because the chair next to me moved. It was a subtle sound, the scrape of wood against wood, but in the dead silence of that kitchen, it sounded like a gunshot. Brandon froze. His hand, halfway to his mouth with the biscuit, stopped in midair. His eyes darted to my right. He had been so focused on the food, so focused on his own demands, that he hadn't checked the corners of the room. He hadn't noticed the high-backed velvet armchair that sat in the shadow of the china cabinet. The chair turned. Sitting there, grim-faced and silent as a tombstone, was my brother Thomas. Uncle Thomas. Brandon's face, which had been flushed from the liquor and the heat of the kitchen, turned gray. It wasn't a gradual fade. It was instant. The color drained out of him like water from a cracked pitcher. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Thomas was wearing his Sunday suit, the charcoal one he usually saved for weddings and funerals. His hands were folded on his lap, resting on top of a cane made of heavy hickory wood. But it wasn't the cane that made Brandon's breath hitch. It was the badge clipped to Thomas's belt, his retired precinct captain's badge. It caught a beam of morning sunlight and flared, a golden eye staring straight at Brandon's soul. And Thomas wasn't alone. From the other side of the table, near the pantry door, another figure stepped forward. A mountain of a man in a beige uniform, his hat tucked respectfully under his arm. Sheriff Miller, the current sheriff of Chatham County. a man who had eaten at this very table every Thanksgiving for the last 10 years. "Morning, Brandon," the sheriff said. His voice was deep, rumbling like thunder in a canyon. It wasn't friendly. The biscuit fell from Brandon's hand. It hit the floor with a soft thud and crumbled, scattering buttery flakes across the pristine linoleum. He knew. In that 1 second, the arrogance evaporated. The swagger dissolved. The man of the house vanished, replaced by a terrified little boy who had just realized he had pushed the one person who loved him past the point of no return. He knew that my silence the night before hadn't been fear. It hadn't been submission. It hadn't been a mother accepting her place beneath the heel of her child. It had been a verdict. But for you to understand how we got to this breakfast that felt more like a courtroom, for you to understand why a mother would sit across from her only son and watch the police close in, let me introduce myself properly. I'm Eleanor Vance. I'm 68 years old, a widow, and I live in an old neighborhood in Savannah, Georgia. You know the kind. The kind where the live oaks drape over the streets like cathedral arches, where the cicadas hum a constant soundtrack, and where everyone knows everyone's business. It's a polite place, a gentle place, or at least it was. I have lived in this house for 42 years. I have scrubbed these floors on my hands and knees. I have painted these walls. I have filled this home with memories, with laughter, with the smell of baking bread and the sound of piano practice. I thought this house was my sanctuary. I thought I would grow old here, safe and warm, surrounded by the echoes of a life well lived. But safety is an illusion. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a stranger in a dark alley. Sometimes the monster has your eyes. Sometimes the threat has a key to the front door. It didn't start with a hit. Violence is rarely the beginning. It is usually the end of a very long, very quiet road. It started with a phone call 6 months ago, on a Tuesday that seemed just like any other. I was in the garden, pruning the azaleas. The sun was warm on my back, and the dirt felt good in my hands. I remember feeling content. I remember thinking that my life was simple, and that simple was good. Then the phone rang. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to answer it. I saw the name on the caller ID, Brandon. My heart gave a little jump. It always did. No matter how old they get, no matter how many times they disappoint you, a mother's heart is hardwired to hope. I picked up the phone. "Hello, Mom." His voice was tight, strained. It was the voice he used when he was 10 and had broken a neighbor's window. It was the voice of trouble. "Brandon? What's wrong?" I messed up, Mom. They fired me. It was total bull. I mean, it wasn't my fault. The manager just had it out for me, but I lost the apartment. My stomach tightened. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't the second. But the silence on the other end of the line was heavy with expectation. "I have nowhere to go," he whispered. "I just need a place for a week. 2 weeks, tops. Just until I get back on my feet. Please, Mom. You're the only one I have." I looked out the window at my garden, at the peace I had cultivated. I knew deep down in my gut that I should say no. I knew that Brandon was a storm looking for a place to crash. But I am a mother, and when your child cries out in the dark, you don't lock the door. You open it. "Come home," I said. And with those 2 words, I signed the death warrant for the life I knew. The kitchen clock hummed. 5:30 a.m. My kitchen, usually a place of warmth, felt like an operating room. The overhead light was bright and unforgiving. I moved with a strange, numb precision. My back ached where I had hit the cabinet, a dull throb that shot down my spine every time I reached for a spice jar. My lip was swollen tight, making it hard to sip my coffee. But I didn't stop. I rolled out the biscuit dough. Thump. Roll. Turn. I cut the circles. Press. Twist. Lift. I was making sawmill gravy, Caleb's favorite. It requires patience. You have to brown the sausage just right, stir the flour until it's golden, and pour the milk in slow. It's a labor of love. Or today, a labor of war. As the sausage sizzled in the cast-iron skillet, filling the house with the smell of sage and black pepper, I thought about the man sleeping upstairs. He was probably dreaming of his victory. He was dreaming that he had finally broken the old woman. He thought that when he woke up, I would be cowering. He thought this breakfast was a peace treaty, a surrender. He didn't know that the smell of gravy wasn't a comfort. It was bait. I set the table. Not the everyday placemats. No. I went to the linen closet and pulled out the white lace tablecloth my mother brought over from Ireland. I polished the good silver forks until they gleamed like knives. I placed fresh magnolias from the garden in a crystal vase. The table looked beautiful. It looked like a celebration. But if you looked closely, you would see the terrifying precision of it. Everything was too perfect. At 7 a.m. sharp, a gentle knock rattled the back door. I opened it. The morning air was crisp and wet from the storm. Mrs. Hattie stood there. She is 72 years old, a woman who served 20 years on the bench. She was wearing her Sunday suit, a severe navy blue skirt and blazer, and her pearls. She wasn't carrying a casserole dish. She was carrying her leather briefcase. Behind her stood Sheriff David Miller. He wasn't in his fishing clothes. He was in full uniform. His badge caught the morning sun. His hat was in his hands. "Martha," Hattie said. Her voice was usually warm, like molasses. Today it was steel. I stepped back to let them in. As soon as the kitchen light hit my face, David gasped. "Good Lord, Martha," he whispered. He took a step forward, his hand instinctively going to his belt. "He did that to you." I saw the rage flare in David's eyes. He had known Caleb since he was in diapers. He had taught Caleb how to tie a knot. "He did," I said calmly. "But we are not going to talk about it yet. Not until he is sitting in that chair." Hattie walked over to me. She didn't hug me. She knew I might shatter if she did. She reached out and gently touched my shoulder. "We are here," she said. "We are witnesses. And we are the wall he will not cross." "Thank you," I said. "Now please, sit." "Hattie, take the head of the table facing the stairs." "David, I want you in the kitchen, just out of sight." "You want me to hide?" David asked, his jaw tight. "I want him to feel safe," I said. "I want him to get comfortable. I want him to take that first bite and think he got away with it. And then, I want you to take his world away." David nodded. A slow, grim nod. "Yes, ma'am." 8 a.m. I heard it. The floorboards upstairs creaked. The heavy, thumping footsteps of a man who walks like he owns the earth. I sat in my chair at the end of the table. I smoothed my blue dress over my knees. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands, folded on the lace tablecloth, were steady. I heard the water running in the bathroom, the toilet flush, then the footsteps on the stairs. Thump, thump, thump. He paused in the hallway. I knew why. He was smelling the air. Bacon, biscuits, coffee. I could almost hear his thought process. "See? She knows who's boss. She's making it up to me." He walked into the dining room. He looked rough. His eyes were puffy slits. His shirt was wrinkled. He hadn't shaved. But he had a smirk on his face that made my stomach turn. He didn't see Hattie at first. The high-backed chair obscured her. He only saw me. He stopped in the doorway, leaning against the frame. He looked at my swollen lip, the purple bruise blooming on my cheek. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Well, well," he said, his voice thick with sleep and arrogance. "Look at this." The queen finally came down from her throne to serve the commoners. I didn't speak. I just poured coffee into a cup. He walked to the table, pulling out his chair, the one closest to the biscuits. He sat down heavily. "This is better, Mom," he said, reaching for a biscuit. He broke it open, steam rising from the fluffy center. "This is how it should be. You respect me, I respect you. Simple." He slathered butter on the bread. He didn't even look at me. He was too busy looking at his victory. "I was thinking," he said, his mouth full of biscuit. "Since you're obviously feeling reasonable today, I called a realtor this morning. We can get a quick cash offer for this place. We'll put you in a nice condo. Something smaller. Easier to clean." He swallowed. He smiled. "It's for the best." "No, Caleb," a voice said. It wasn't my voice. Caleb froze. The coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. Slowly, Mrs. Hattie leaned forward from the shadows of the high-backed chair. She placed her elbows on the table and interlaced her fingers. "You won't be calling any realtors," Hattie said. "And you certainly won't be putting your mother anywhere." Caleb dropped the cup. It shattered on the saucer. Coffee spilled onto the white lace, a dark, spreading stain. Mrs. Hattie," he stammered. He pushed his chair back, the legs screeching against the wood floor. "What are you doing here?" "I'm having breakfast," Hattie said calmly. "And I'm holding court." "This is a private breakfast," Caleb snapped, his face flushing red. "Mom, tell her to leave. This is family business." I stood up. My legs felt strong. The fear was gone. "It stopped being family business at 3:15 this morning," I said. My voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "It stopped being family business when you put your hands on me." Caleb laughed, but it was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Oh, come on. You're being dramatic. I had a few drinks. I pushed you. Big deal. We're family. We forgive each other." "Forgiveness is for mistakes, Caleb," I said. "Assault is a choice." "Assault." He stood up, his fists clenching. "You think you can scare me with an old lady neighbor? I'm your son. You owe me. I owe you nothing." I yelled. The volume surprised even me. "I gave you life. I gave you a home. I gave you my dignity for 2 years. But last night you took payment in blood." I pointed to my face, to the ugly purple bruise. "Look at it, Caleb. Look at it." He couldn't look. He turned his head away. "That mark," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "That is the receipt for your eviction." "You can't kick me out," he sneered, trying to regain control. "I have rights. This is my father's house." "Actually," a deep voice boomed from the kitchen doorway. "It's not." Caleb spun around. Sheriff Miller filled the doorway. He looked 10 feet tall. He wasn't smiling. "David." Caleb's face went white. "Dave, come on. It's me. Caleb. We went fishing. You gave me my first beer." "That boy is gone, Caleb," David said, walking into the room. His hand rested on his handcuffs. "That boy wouldn't hit his mother. That boy wouldn't terrorize a widow. It's a misunderstanding," Caleb shouted, backing into the corner. "She fell. She's old, she's clumsy. Tell them, Mom. Tell them you fell." The room went silent. Everyone looked at me. This was it. The final test. The moment every mother dreads. The moment I had to choose between my heart and my survival. I looked at my son. I saw the fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing me, but fear of consequences. I looked at Hattie. I looked at David. Then I looked Caleb dead in the eye. "I didn't fall," I said clearly. "My son, Caleb Calloway, struck me in the face. He threatened my life. And I want to press charges." The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest sound I have ever heard. Click. Click. Caleb didn't fight. He deflated. He slumped over like a balloon losing air. He started to cry loud, ugly sobs. "Mama, please," he whimpered as David led him toward the door. "Don't let them take me. I'm sorry. I'll change. I promise." I stood on the porch and watched them walk him to the squad car. The neighbors were peeking out from behind their curtains. I didn't care. Let them look. Let them see that Martha Calloway doesn't raise victims. David put him in the back seat. Caleb pressed his face against the glass, looking at me. I didn't wave. I turned back to my house. I walked into the dining room. Hattie was still sitting there. The coffee stain was spreading on the lace tablecloth. The biscuits were cold. I sat down in my chair. My hands finally started to shake. Hattie poured me a fresh cup of coffee. She slid it across the table. "Drink," she said gently. "It's over, Martha." I lifted the cup. The steam warmed my face. I took a sip. It was bitter and strong. The house was quiet. No TV blaring. No heavy footsteps. No fear. I touched the bruise on my cheek one last time. It hurt. It would hurt for a while. But as I looked out the window at the empty driveway, I realized something. My son was in a cell. My heart was broken. But for the first time in 2 years, I was free. The days that followed Caleb's arrest were the strangest of my life. You would think that with the monster gone, the house would feel light. But at first, it just felt empty. The silence was heavy. It pressed against my eardrums. For 2 years, I had lived with the noise of his chaos. The slamming doors, the TV blaring sports at 2 a.m., the heavy footsteps. Now I could hear the refrigerator hum. I could hear the clock tick. The guilt came in waves. It's a terrible thing, mother's guilt. It whispers to you in the dark. You put your own son in a cage. He's cold tonight. You betrayed him. I had nightmares. I dreamt he was a little boy again, crying in a crib I couldn't reach. I'd wake up sweating, reaching for the phone to call the sheriff and say, "I changed my mind. Bring him back." But I never made the call, because every time I reached for the phone, I would touch my cheek. The bruise was turning a sickly yellow-green, fading like an old storm cloud. But the memory of the pain, the shock of his hand on my face, kept my resolve like steel. Mrs. Hattie was my rock. She didn't coddle me. She didn't say, "Oh, poor Martha." She came over every afternoon with herbal tea and hard truths. "Stop it, Martha," she said one day when she caught me crying over Caleb's high school yearbook. "You didn't put him in jail. The liquor put him there. His fist put him there. You just opened the door so the consequences could find him." By the 3rd week, the fog began to lift. I realized I wasn't just grieving my son. I was grieving the idea of him. I was grieving the fantasy that he would magically get better if I just loved him enough. I started to take my house back. I hired a young man from the church to paint Caleb's room. We painted over the gray walls with a soft butter yellow. I packed up his things, the empty bottles I found hidden under the bed, the angry clutter of his life, and I put them in storage. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I called a security company. I've lived in this house for 40 years with the doors unlocked. But Caleb's parting words, "You'll regret this," had planted a seed of fear I needed to dig out. When the technician showed me how to use the keypad, how to arm the system with a simple beep, I felt a weight lift off my chest. That little red light on the panel wasn't just technology. It was a boundary. It was me saying, "This is my space. You enter only by invitation." I started sleeping through the night for the first time in 2 years. 3 months later, the letter arrived. It was a plain white envelope from the County Rehabilitation Center. The court had mandated 6 months of inpatient rehab and anger management instead of prison time, thanks to Sheriff Miller's testimony. My hands trembled as I held it. I sat on the porch swing, the same swing where I used to rock Caleb as a baby. I opened it. The handwriting was shaky. It wasn't the arrogant scrawl of the man who demanded money. It looked like the handwriting of a man who was relearning how to hold a pen. "Dear Mama, I don't know how to start this. I'm sorry, feels like a cheap word. I've said it 1,000 times before just to get you to open your wallet. Being in here, the first week I hated you. I cursed your name to anyone who would listen. I told myself you were the villain. But then the fog cleared. The alcohol left my system. And for the first time in years, I had to look in the mirror without the blur. I saw the bruise on your face in my memory. And I felt sick. I realized that the man who did that, he wasn't me. But he was me. I let him in. You didn't arrest me, Mama. You saved me. If you hadn't stopped me that morning, I don't know what I would have done next. I was falling, and I was going to take you down with me. Thank you for loving me enough to stop me. Caleb." I read the letter until the sun went down. I didn't cry tears of sadness. I cried tears of relief. My son was still in there. Buried deep under the addiction and the entitlement, the boy who caught the base was still alive. 6 months passed. The phone rang. It was Caleb's caseworker. He had completed the program. He was out. He was living in a halfway house, working at a grocery store bagging items. He wanted to see me. We met at a diner halfway between my house and the city. Neutral ground. Mrs. Hattie offered to come, but I told her no. I needed to do this alone. When he walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. He was thinner. The bloat in his face was gone. He was wearing a simple uniform polo shirt, tucked in. He looked humble. He stood by the booth, waiting. He didn't assume he could sit. "Hello, Mama," he said softly. "Hello, Caleb," I said. "Sit." We ordered coffee. For the first 10 minutes, we talked about the weather. The Braves game. Small things. It was awkward, but it was civil. Then he put his coffee cup down. "I'm working hard," he said, looking at his hands. "I'm going to AA meetings every night. I'm saving money." "I'm glad to hear that, Caleb." "I truly am." He looked up at me, hope flickering in his eyes. "The halfway house, it's loud. It's hard to sleep." I was thinking, maybe in a few months, if I keep my nose clean, maybe I could come back to the guest room. I'd pay rent. I'd mow the lawn. The question hung in the air. My heart, that treacherous mother's heart, wanted to say yes. I wanted to bring my baby home. I wanted to cook him biscuits. But then I touched my cheek. I remembered the sound of the slap. I remembered the terror of 3 a.m. I looked him in the eye. "No, Caleb." The hope in his eyes died a little, but he didn't get angry. He just listened. "I love you," I said. "I will always love you. We can have coffee every Sunday. We can talk on the phone. But you can never live in my house again." "Mama." "No," I repeated, firmer this time. "My home is my sanctuary, and I have worked too hard to rebuild my peace to risk it again. You need to build your own sanctuary now. You need to stand on your own 2 feet, because my back is too tired to carry you." He stared at me for a long time. Then slowly he nodded. "I understand," he whispered. And the amazing thing was, I think he actually did. I drove home that afternoon with the windows down, letting the Georgia air fill the car. I pulled into my driveway. The oak trees waved at me. The house stood there, white and proud, my kingdom. I walked into my kitchen. It was quiet, but it wasn't a lonely quiet anymore. It was a peaceful quiet. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat in my rocking chair. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But I don't think what I served Caleb was revenge. I served him reality. And reality is the only thing that can actually save a person. To anyone listening out there, maybe you are holding onto a rope that is burning your hands. Maybe you are calling it love or loyalty or family. But if that rope is dragging you into the dark, let go. You can love them from a distance. You can pray for them from a safe place. But never, ever set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. My name is Martha Calloway. I am a mother. I am a survivor. And tonight, I am going to sleep soundly.